Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds, and today I'm hanging out with the angry GM and angry nerd. So hopefully he's extra angry today and riled up. I tried to hire some hooligans to go shake him for me so we could get him in rare form today.
Jesus, I don't need to be shaken up. All you have to do is mention something like metagaming or dwarf beards, and I'm there.
Dwarf beards, huh? What's your issue with dwarf beards? Dwarf beards are one of my favorite things.
Oh, yeah, but go back to the old days when there was the argument as to whether female dwarves had beards, and that was, like this giant topic that everybody was fighting over.
Whoa, wait a minute. We're fighting over that? They have beards. They're
They
dwarves.
do not.
Are you sure about that?
I am 100% positive.
We always still debate that. I feel like dwarven women should have beards.
Hey, listen, you don't need my permission to play your game any wrong way you want, so.
Perfect. What time is it over there? Where in the world are you coming from?
I am coming from Chicago, the Windy Apple, as we call it.
Nice. So you guys are like an hour behind us, I think.
Yeah, it's 11 a.m. here.
Nice. Mainly you're a blogger. You got a fantastic site with tons of content on it. Unfortunately, I do not visit it as much as I would like. Actually, I can even date like the last time I was over there reading something. It was the two monsters that are one monster, but not like that.
the two-headed, two-tailed, bifurcated snake article.
Yes, that's exactly it.
That infuriated people on Twitter. But I was actually, with articles like that, I'm really trying to show people how to think about problems. And it is like it's a question nobody would ask is, what is the difference between one monster and two monsters? In terms of, so two monsters have twice as many hit points as one monster. They have twice as many actions as one monster, and they can occupy two positions. So if you wanted to make a monster that was twice as powerful as one monster, you would need to be able to accomplish those things or make up for the fact that it couldn't do those things. And that was the whole problem that I was trying to work through, is how do you make a more powerful, like a boss monster?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, like the article was you basically working through that problem.
That's exactly it. And I do that because I like to show people how to think. There's a lot of websites out there that will go through and say, here's a piece of advice. This is how you should do it because this is how I do it. And I will say that too. I will say this is how you should do it and this is how I do it because I'm right and you're wrong. But I will also say, here's 5,000 words as to how I reached that conclusion. And if you don't like my conclusion, at least now you know how to think through the problem and to hit your own. The secret is I really don't care if people agree with me or disagree with me as long as I get their brains working.
So yeah, that's a good point, and it's very cool that you just walk them through the process. You take them through your process so that they can either agree or disagree, but at least they know how you got to the conclusion.
Right, and they can. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Do you spend much time over at
Reddit? No, I do not go anywhere near Reddit.
I just think it'd be a fun place for you.
Occasionally, someone will put up one of my articles on Reddit. In fact, it happens more than occasionally because I am somewhat divisive and trolly, as it were. So occasionally, I will suddenly see some traffic coming in from Reddit, and I'll be like, oh, someone posted one of my articles, and I'll pop over there and watch the fight play out. Which is amusing for a few comments, and then the fight generally on Reddit always degenerates into I can't listen to this guy, I don't care how smart he is because he's pretending to be an asshole or he really is an asshole. And the other one is I can't listen to this guy because he censors his curse words, and so he's a child.
You actually get that complaint censoring the curse
all the time, all the friggin' time. I don't understand it. That's the number 2 complaint I get about my content is, why do you censor your curse words? Why are you behaving like a child?
So I won't ask you why you're behaving like a child, but why do you censor your curse words? Or do you just not curse in your regular, everyday life?
Oh no, I swear like a fucking sailor on leave. But that was a decision that I made very early on when I created the angry character, who is basically just me amped up to 11. And considering I normally run at about 8, that isn't much of a jump. People would be surprised to know how much of me is actually in angry. But in the end, I wanted angry to be sort of like who is the Looney Tunes character, Yosemite Sam, who's always losing his temper. He's like, "Oh, you're a fucking flame, freaking big." But I wanted to emphasize that he was, in fact, a cartoon character. He's not a real person, you know. So I chose to use Grawlix, the standard comic book swearing, as just that sort of signal that, yeah, this guy is still a character. It draws a line between me and him.
No, I actually I like it, and that is there's some other things about it that I like too, because I've learned through experience. We did like one of our first cons running a game, and we had fans show up, and that was really cool. Until I'm looking at like 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds going, "Oh my God, they're listening to us." I'm like looking at their parents like, "Oh my God, how can you let them listen to us? What are you thinking?" So yeah. So I can totally get that. I mean, we're probably not going to change anytime soon, but we try and we shoot for the hard RPG 13, or for the hard PG 13.
Yeah, I should have asked about that before we started. Like,
No,
how many F-bombs do I get?
We don't actually count here on Nerdarchy. They just kind of happen when they happen.
I like to save them all up and use them for one big thing at the end.
It depends, like which one of us is being triggered at the time. My brother who just abandoned us and left Nerdarchy to do his own thing. Whenever the sorcerer come up, that would be his trigger, and then he would go off.
That's one I understand, honestly.
That and the lore wizard. The lore wizard was another one. Me as a GM, I really don't care that much. I'm like, whatever. You want to be a lore wizard, be a lore wizard. You want to be an Aarakocra, fly around. I don't care. I just found a great target for the next sleep spell.
Except for one thing, which is gnomes. I actually don't ban anything without a good gameplay and table reason to do it. Like, I have banned wild magic sorcerers simply because they take so much extra time and cognitive load to resolve their things, because there's so many elements to their spells and their abilities that trigger on random elements or specific die rolls that the player has to be watching. Oh, I rolled an odd number, or I rolled this, or I rolled that, or is it a wild surge? And you always have to have that wild surge table the chart at the table. And so that's why you know what? I don't need this speed bump in my game. Every time it's the sorcerer's turn in combat, I know that it's going to take twice as long to cast a spell. It already takes long enough to cast spells, so I really don't need that crap.
Really, I mean, we've got one wild sorcerer, and I really feel it doesn't matter so much. Like, he casts Tides of Chaos, and then I know he's going to get a surge, and I'm like, just your next spell, just surge. So literally, he should know, like the way I do it anyway. They should just know to have it ready and just roll your percentile dice with whatever other dice you're going to roll.
Yeah, but sure. Even then, it's still roll the percentile. So roll the next spell, see if it's successful. Resolve that, roll the percentile dice, look over to a chart, read the chart effect and apply the chart effect. It's still, I mean, you're talking a small number of seconds, but it comes down to, if I can get sort of high level for a second, it comes down to the pacing curve in D&D being fucked up or screwed up to begin with. In theater and video, or movies and video games and stuff, there's this concept of a pacing curve where basically throughout the movie you have building up of tension to a climax, and then it resolves and drops off, and the climax is the point of highest tension. But if you look at individual scenes follow that same thing. A scene starts, tension builds up, the scene hits a climax, and then the action falls off. And every individual choice and action also has a pacing curve to it. So in D&D, the resolution of an action is the player makes a choice and makes all the decisions involved in that choice. I'm going to cast a spell. It's going to be this spell. I'm targeting that opponent. I'm going to apply this meta magic feat or whatever. Makes all those decisions. Then, that's the decision made. Now we have to resolve the action, and that's the moment of highest tension is the die rolling, right? Mm-hmm. So then the die rolls, it hits the table, everybody sees what it does, and then the action should fall away. It should. That was the moment of highest tension. The problem is in D&D, what happens after the die rolls is a bunch of math happens. I got to add +2, yada, yada, yada. That's a 17 versus the DC, or 18 versus the armor class. Did it hit? And then the GM has to look and say, yes, it hit, blah, 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 blah. And then the resolution gets dragged out so that there's action after that moment of highest tension that prevents it from falling off and going into the next action. So I try to avoid as much as I can after the die roll. And as much extra stuff after the die roll because it maintains a flow and a pace to the game.
So with the Wild Sorcerer, when they search, I feel like all you did is move the tension. Because actually, generally, what happens with that die roll is more fun than whatever the attack roll was.
I don't disagree, but the point is the moment of highest tension at the table is the die roll itself. The dice hitting the table. Every additional step and every level of add complexity after the dice hit the table is drawing out the action past the moment of highest tension. It's sort of like when you roll the dice, you hold your breath, right? It's like, I got to roll the dice. And then the dice hit the table, and then you let that breath go. And you either let it go with a gasp or with a sigh, depending on whether it's good or bad. The longer it takes to find out everything that happened as a result of that die roll, the longer you're holding your breath.
So I hear what you're saying, and I feel it. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I guess it depends where you want to focus, right? Why you're playing, why the game's going on. But I can point to specific instances in my game where, granted, with the pacing, what you're talking about is true. It's an RPG. For the most part, unless you're playing a super rules-like game, the pacing is always going to be kind of horrible because all these mechanics and math have to happen, and it slows things down. But there's been a couple times the wild mage surges and a fireball explodes at their feet in the bar, setting the bar on fire because they're standing in front of all this liquor. Creates these great moments in the game. Or the other time they're in the middle of the fight, the wild mage casts a spell, polymorphs himself into a sheep. The next thing you know, my two goblin players are riding the sheep around the battlefield. The sheep is trying to get away from the battle. The goblins are rangers, so they're using animal handling to make it stay in the battle. It's just stuff like that is hilarious to me. And
sure.
Obviously every group's different.
But okay, so now how many of those wild surge rolls just dissipate like a fart in the wind? I mean, you gave me two examples of here were some really great wild surge rolls. How many of them don't do that?
Well, that's true. There's a bunch that are kind of nothing happens, or there's a little bit of a benefit, or there's a little bit of something that happens. I think the very last one that went off was he couldn't talk, so he couldn't cast any spells with a verbal component for the rest of that encounter.
All right, I'm going to dare you to do something to prove myself right.
Okay.
Next time you're running the game with your wild magic sorcerer, pre-roll the wild surge. You do it behind the screen with the chart. You pre-roll that wild surge so that if the wild surge comes up, you already know the effect. The die roll hits the table, and you just narrate the whole result, including the wild surge. Take out that resolution that comes after the die roll. You will see how much better the action flows. I promise you.
Okay. And that's actually very doable. So, you pointed out what you perceive as a problem, but it also gave the solution.
Yeah, that's what I do. I'm, I'm like the Dalai Lama of gaming with more swearing.
Our staff writer Scott agrees with you. The pacing is horrible in D&D, and I think RPGs in general. The crunchier you get, the worse, the more broken up it gets. But I also feel like as nerds, there's a lot of us that just kind of like that part of it as well.
Well, I'm not. Look, there's nothing wrong with crunch, but wouldn't it be interesting if the crunch happened before you rolled the dice? Like if you did decision, math, and die roll. If you could find a way to do that so that the minute that die hits the table, everybody knows the outcome. You know, like what if the players roll the you tell the players exactly what they need on the die. You know, for example, the player's got a +6 to attack, and you know the armor class is 17. So you say, okay, you need an 11 to hit. And you do that before the attack roll. So then the player rolls. The minute that die hits the table, everybody knows whether the attack hit. Everybody can look at that and go, oh, yes, or crap. You know?
The so our one GM, he does he kind of does that, but not really, because he sets the DCs and they're covered, and then you roll and he uncovers the DC.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of the same thing.
It's similar, but like I said, the key is the moment of highest tension in any action is that die roll. That's where we're holding our breath. The minute the die roll is done, everybody should know what happened.
So I guess that would lead into one of your other pet peeves, though. When you do that, you're going to always have those players that then begin working the numbers, right? I mean, they're already doing it. Like even if you don't do that, they're working and looking for their target number, and 21 missed, but 22 hit, so we know it's a 22.
Wait a minute, you said my pet peeve? Are you projecting your pet peeve?
Metagaming, you already said it.
Yeah, you're right. I hate the word metagaming because it's a load of bullshit that GMs use to yell at players for things they don't like.
I stand corrected. I misinterpreted when you used the metagame. You know, go into metagaming for me then.
I don't agree that word exists. Like, and I mean, you just gave a perfect example. Mm-hmm. The player's working the numbers, trying to figure out the armor class of an opponent, say. So what? So what if the players know exactly what they need to hit? Okay? And why shouldn't they anyway? Any trained combatant is going to look at somebody on the battlefield and say, well, he's wearing armor. He's going to be difficult to hit compared to that guy who isn't wearing armor. And wow, look how he moves. He's really nimble and agile. He's going to be hard to hit. Or that thing has a really thick carapace. It's going to be hard to hit. Or that thing has a magical field around it that's going to make it hard to hit. There is no reason why a trained combatant who has a weapon proficiency or a spell proficiency or whatever, can't assess mostly how well their opponent defends itself. I mean, I go back to martial arts and fencing because I was a fencer in high school. And one of the things we were trained to do was to read our opponent. As soon as you get on the strip, you start feeling out the opponent so that this is how fast they move. This is their distance. This is all of that crap. That's part of being a skilled combatant. And every character in D&D is a skilled combatant. So end of the day, there's no reason to say, oh, the players can't know the armor class of an opponent. And even if they had that information, all it would do was allow them to make better choices. Like, wow, this guy's going to be really hard to hit. I should use my uber power with extra accuracy. And what's wrong with that? Role-playing games are a game of making informed decisions and exploring the consequences. Players should have the information they need to make the best possible decisions.
That absolutely makes sense. And it's always been something, I guess, that as I see other GMs and other players get annoyed with things like that, where actually very little rarely bothers me at the table. It's just my general lack of empathy for the world at large. But
you're very anti-me. You seem to be very mellow about things.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, man. And a year from now, we'll make a difference. Is kind of like my philosophy.
Well, if I can throw the other side of metagaming in here, since you already got me started on the rant, I'll use the classic example is the troll situation. In D&D, trolls regenerate any damage that doesn't come from fire or acid. The rules vary depending on the edition, but the basics are there. So you as the GM, you throw a troll on the table, and the players immediately, because they know what trolls are, even if their characters have never encountered a troll, they break out the fire, they break out the acid. And then the GM is like, you're metagaming, how dare you? It's like, hold on a second. Number one, so what? You're the idiot as the GM who created a scenario that could be easily broken just by knowledge. Okay, like this troll is going to be a difficult challenge unless they actually know anything about it. And as soon as they know something about it, the challenge is broken. Well, if you don't want the challenge broken, you're going to have to do better with your challenges, my good sir. What if the room is filled with flammable gas? Now break out the fire. Are you willing to risk blowing yourself up to do extra damage to the troll? Or do you all back out the room and someone holds the troll in the doorway and then you throw the flask of oil in there? So design a challenge that isn't broken by knowledge. But the second thing is that GMs always fall back on that excuse of, well, it's not realistic. They never encountered a troll. And my point is, you know what? I have never in my life encountered a vampire in real life. And I sure as hell know how to kill them. Like, if a vampire walked in this room right now, he would be screwed. Okay, I've got garlic in the other room. I've got wooden stakes. I've got everything I need. I have methods of decapitating it. And I have fire. I know all of the tricks. I even have rice if it's like a classic vampire that I can drop on the floor so it has to obsessively, compulsively count it. I know all that crap because it's part of my pop culture. And people will say, oh, well, they didn't have pop culture back in the medieval period. And I say, bullshit. Every Greek citizen back in the day, or Roman citizen, no, every Greek citizen back in the day knew the solution to the Sphinx's riddle because it was in a play. You know, every Greek citizen knew what a manticore or a hydra was because they were in their stories and their mythology. You know, it's not ridiculous to assume that players have a knowledge, or the characters have a knowledge of the world they live in, and that they've heard these legends and stories. And sure enough, while they were going through their combat training, you know, some of this stuff probably came up. So there's no really good excuse to say, oh, well, they wouldn't know it. And if you fight against metagaming, what you're really fighting against is, I'm not allowed to screw my players by saying, yeah, there is a solution, but you're not allowed to use it. And the problem that enters into with the troll scenario is that, okay, so I have decided the players are not allowed to act on their knowledge that fire will kill trolls because their characters couldn't know it, and I don't want them to break my challenge. So normally, if you were in a situation like that where you didn't know how to deal with an opponent, you would be experimenting. You would be trying different things. And then hopefully by serendipity, you stumble on the fire, right? The wizard would throw several different spells. When the Burning Hand spell was super effective, they'd be like, oh, it's fire. Everybody do fire. The problem is that if it's a scenario where the players know the solution, but the characters don't, and the GM won't let the players use the solution, how many mistakes do the players have to make before the GM says, okay, you fucked up enough that now you can figure out fire? Because there's no organic way for the party to then feel their way through that challenge. They can't accidentally use fire, because if they try to cast fire spells, you'll say, no, that's metagaming. So it creates a ridiculous scenario anyway. The whole concept of metagaming is screwed up.
The only thing I took away from that is I should definitely put my players in a room with flammable gas and a troll.
Mm-hmm.
No, you bring up great points. And the truth of the matter is they'll eventually hack the troll to pieces on the ground. It'll keep regenerating. They'll keep hacking it. And likely they would try and do something like set it on fire. So you're absolutely right. It doesn't really matter in the big scheme of things.
Right. And if you want the troll to be a challenge, find a way that using fire or using acid is, you know, limited. Hey, fire and acid are limited resources in the game, you know, except for the wizard's one firebolt cantrip that they can throw endlessly. It's kind of hard to keep coming up with fire and acid. So yeah, one troll is easily taken down if the party throws some fire and acid. But what if it's a warren filled with trolls? Now they've got to ration that shit. Even that becomes a difficult issue. It's like, wow, there's 50 trolls in here. I don't have enough fireball spells to kill them all. And if we try to leave and go camp, they're going to chase us. You know?
Well, 5th edition, you have unlimited cantrips, so you can burn them all day.
You know, obviously we can talk edition by edition, but
yeah.
When you're even that where you have the unlimited cantrips, that's great. So you have one character in the party that can effectively damage the opponent instead of 5. That still hurts. You know, it's like if only the wizard can hurt the opponent, that's still much more dangerous than anybody can hurt it.
So there's some doubts in the chat as to whether or not you would actually be able to take on the vampire.
Oh, tell any. Wait, I'm not even seeing the chat.
The chat is on the watch page.
On YouTube?
Yeah. Comic Book University. Big Guy says a vampire would be in trouble if he came into the room. It's metagaming to say. Is it metagaming to say he'd shit his pants in real life?
Actually. Oops, sorry.
It's okay. I do that all the time too. I eventually learned to mute it beforehand. You can teach an old dog.
First of all, the vampire can't even get in here because I didn't invite it. See, this is the other thing too. This is what drives me crazy. Okay, chat, screw you all. Because let me tell you what you just did. I explained a concept. The concept of why metagaming is not something that you should be concerned about and why you should instead focus on building better challenges and chill the freak out at your table. You guys are all just attacking the example. Like, oh, if you disprove the example, you argue the concept. That's not true. I hate when people do that. I write 5,000-word article explaining this entire thought process, and then someone says, you know, in the first paragraph, use this example, and technically chess is a game of perfect knowledge, so therefore I win, and everything else you said is wrong. No, fuck you. You're still wrong, moron. Get lost. Also, if there are any vampires in the chat, bring it.
There you go. He's called out. He's called out the vampires in the chat. That's awesome.
Maybe I'm a secret werewolf, and we all know in that Van Helsing movie that werewolves are vampires' one weakness. For reasons.
Oh, that's great. Also, as soon as you started using the troll example, they started going off with underwater trolls.
Well, the whole Scrag thing was actually exactly that. It was like, okay, now everybody knows trolls. How do we make them, you know, well, we make them aquatic, then they're not flammable anymore. And then also we can have endless arguments as to how much acid is neutralized in water, which was always a fun thing that came up at the table. It's like, I throw acid in the water. No, it would be neutralized. Well, you know, before it neutralized, it would still do damage, blah, 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 blah. And then you have the one idiot who's calculating the molar strength of the acid in seawater, and then you have to punch them and kill their character.
I like that solution. Just kill the player, not the character. Leave the character. Kill the player. No, Nerdarchy does not condone murdering your fellow gamers. Do you have a favorite edition?
Rio Ayu Blue or Rio Lu Blue is saying, I'm with you. Time for DMs to get creative, change the weaknesses of the pop culture monster manual. No, that is bullshit. That is such a phoning it in crap approach. Okay, you come up with a way to work within the monster manual. You take those weaknesses and you put them in situations where those weaknesses create challenges. Okay, no, you just want to shuffle your weaknesses around. Give me your DM screen. You're done.
Sorry, buddy. No more DMing for you.
Oh my God. You know what? If you want to DM, work at it. Okay.
So I guess, you know,
sorry,
I'm not totally against shuffling around the weaknesses, but not for the sake of shuffling around the weaknesses. Like if you're trying to tell a different story or create, you know, a different monster, sure. I mean, we have a series that we dabble into every once in a while called Fast and Dirty Monsters. It's basically where we just reskin something or several somethings out of the monster manual to make new monsters instead of like doing all the work. It's a cheat.
Sure. And there's nothing wrong with reskinning to reskin, but when you're reskinning to change a monster around because you know your players will have an easier time dealing with it, that's not reskinning anymore. That's called a gotcha. That's like you're creating a Jack in the Box. It's a booby trap. And surprise, you're screwed for no reason other than you want to screw the players.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Absolutely, the idea of just, oh no, they think it's a red dragon, so it's immune to fire or whatever. It's a fire element that does fire damage, but no, my fire element is going to do cold damage and is going to be immune to cold just because reasons. And yeah, unless you can come up with creative story elements that make sense, you're right. It is just a dick move on the DM's part, and it is lazy. not that I'm against lazy DMing, because I generally do most of the stuff off the fly and make it up as I go.
Oh, you're one of those.
I am absolutely one of those. Prep is for the weak.
Well, honestly, though, I mean, I have nothing wrong with prep and with improvisation and no prep, because I do that too. But and that's another thing that I try to focus on, and that's why I write so much on my website, is because people think improvisation is working without a plan or working without prep. What improvisation really is, good improvisation, is planning and executing at the same time. It's like, okay, you still have to understand things like story structure and challenge and building a good challenge and and pacing and all that other crap that we talk about. It's just you have to also be able to pull it off in the moment.
Yeah, generally.
The GM. Sorry.
Generally, I'll just have a premise in my head, or maybe I'll write down 3 sentences on a sheet of paper, whichever. And that's what I'm going to go for the night, unless the players do something else. And then I'm just going to do whatever they do. I'm going to work, within what they give me, and we'll tell the story together.
Mm. Oh, you're okay. Fine. Well, I'm going to leave that alone.
Oh, which that? What I said or something in the chat?
No, it's just the whole collaborative storytelling bullshit. Yeah, fine.
No, let's hear it. I'm always open to different takes on it. You don't like player agency?
Players have absolute agency over their characters and the choices their characters make. That's fine. And I have no problem with that whatsoever. Whatever the characters want to do, it is my job to respond to it. Player agency beyond the character, though, that completely fucks up with what a role-playing game is. Because now the players are making decisions that don't align with their character's goals. But, that's neither here nor there. Now I'm really just now getting nitpicky.
Well, so here's the thing. Like, I guess we talk about this sometimes, and that is the fact that the character can have goals, and the player can have goals, and you don't actually have to line up. Because sometimes I'll personally have goals for my character that are really fucked up, and you would never do to somebody you really like, right. But so they don't line up. So clearly, like even like if you look at 5th edition, like what player or what character would ever really want to be a warlock if they knew all the ins and outs, right? But the player wants them to be a warlock because it's cool, they're angsty, whatever. They want to tell that story, or they want that type of character. But
right.
A lot of times making that choice isn't really like a great decision for the character.
Right, but it is still the choice the character would have made. Like, here's the question: why did the character become a warlock?
Well, for whatever reason he did, because there's different reasons. But essentially, whatever.
Well,
gift
as
power.
a player, you need to understand those reasons. You need to understand the motivations of your character. And then you make decisions based on the decisions the character would make in the world.
Well, so, all right, let me backpedal a little bit here. So, okay.
Sure.
I make a warlock character. He trades his soul, deal with the devil, gets power, right? And eventually he goes, oh, I made a bad decision. Actually wasn't worth my soul. I want that back, right? So that's like a character goal. Well, the player goes, well, if my character gets what he wants, I don't get to play that character the way I like to play him. So
okay.
you don't really.
Whoa, hold on. Why did you make a character who wants something you don't want to play?
No,
What
no,
is
no.
wrong with you?
No, that's not it at all. You got it backwards. I made the character I want to play, but if you fix his problem, he's no longer the character you want to play.
Have you considered making a character who's not working actively against you?
No, never.
That's insane. Like, why would you create a character who your success and the character's success cannot happen simultaneously? That is, the more the character fails, the more successful you are.
Yeah.
That's really fucked up. Do you understand that?
Sure, but that's
you basically either sabotaged yourself or your character.
Exactly. But that happens all the time.
Why is your warlock? Wait. Why is your warlock's goal not? I'd like to get out of the contract, but keep the power.
Well, that would be a good way to do it.
That is a perfect. But that's the human goal, right? Is like, okay, I got to find a way to trick myself out of this agreement, but I don't want to give the money back. That is a standard goal. That's a very human thing, and that's a much more engaging and human character. And then again, now your goals align with the characters. Is yeah, we both want the warlock powers. I just don't want the devil part of it. And now you have a character where you can make decisions and the character can make decisions, and those decisions are going to go in the same direction. And again, I would ask, why did you make that deal with the devil to begin with? Obviously, there was something your character wanted that power with, or obviously your character assumed from the beginning that either the devil wouldn't be a problem or that he could trick his way out of it someday. Which are also basically the assumptions that you, the player, made. It's like, I want to play a warlock, but I'm assuming that the GM is not going to screw me because of my character choice. You know, the player and the GM made the same decision there. Or the player and the character made the same decision there.
So that character actually did get his soul back, and he had to keep it externally in order to keep his power.
Okay.
So it kind of did work out that way anyway, the way the GM engineered it. But the way I was playing the character was his goal was to get back his soul. But when I think about that, I think of it being like, well, if you do that, then isn't the power going to leave?
Mm-hmm.
But you raise a great point. Like, why wouldn't you figure out how to keep the power and get your soul back?
Well, okay. Here's the deal. Characters in role-playing games are still characters in fiction. Okay? And characters in fiction and drama are interesting because it is about human motivations. Even if we're playing robots and elves or whatever, ultimately what we're really exploring is human interactions and the human condition. Okay? If you are setting up your character to make decisions that do not make sense from a human perspective, then the character is less engaging. If you instead force yourself to confront the same internal conflicts that your character would confront, is like, on the one hand, I want to keep the power, but on the other hand, I don't want the devil anymore. That makes for a more interesting character because that character now has an internal conflict to resolve. Internal conflict is what makes choice interesting anyway, because the character has to then choose priorities. At the end of the day, your character is like, okay, you can keep your power and you can have your soul back, but you can't put your soul back in your body. Now your character has to weigh the priorities of I want the power, I want my soul. Is this trade-off worth it? And has to make an interesting and compelling choice.
I agree. I mean, and you actually made me think about it differently by even asking that question.
Yep, I have that power.
So, well done. So, real quick, I want to go to the chat for a roll call, and then we'll get some questions from these guys because they've been pretty active in there. Though the weird thing with the chat is sometimes they're talking with and at us, and sometimes they're just talking amongst themselves. Where you guys at? We got Chicago with the Angry GM. You guys know I'm in Jersey. So also I have an announcement while I'm waiting for you guys to weigh in with the roll call. Today, 5 p.m. Eastern Time, I will have David Harbour on from Stranger Things, Suicide Squad, Quantum of Solace, and some other things. So I don't think he's going to be on very long. He said he'll set aside 20 minutes for us to talk about D&D, so that should be pretty exciting. So they're starting to weigh in: Virginia, Maine, Portugal, Washington State, Canada in the house, Toronto, Seattle, Alabama, Texas, Colorado, Texas, Pennsylvania, Israel. I don't know if we've had any Israels before. Awesome. Glad to see you here. Canada, Arizona, Texas, Minnesota, Texas, San Francisco, Pittsburgh, Tampa. Some more Canada in the house. We got New York, Oregon, Denmark, New Hampshire, Texas, Poland, Tampa, Germany, United Kingdom, Oregon, Germany. Jesus Christ, what time is it in these places? Every time we set, every day, every live chat, I try and set aside at least a little bit of time to see where people are coming from, and it always amazes me to see people all over the world chiming into these things, to watch us talk about nerdy D&D stuff. Ireland. Wow, we're pretty international today, man. It must be the Angry GM. You're bringing them from all corners of the world.
Yeah, that's it. I am definitely a unifying force for world peace. Everybody says that about me. I think it's more unified against a common enemy.
Well, maybe we had a handful of people waiting for this when I opened up the watch page. So not Matt Colville levels where they were freaking camping out like a Grateful Dead concert the day before, but. That was crazy. I jumped on, or I must have had the window open and just had left it open, and I looked in the morning at like 8:30 in the morning, my time. So it was like almost 4 hours before it was supposed to start. They were already in there talking with each other.
Oh wow!
Yeah. It's nuts. He's the Grateful Dead. He's the Jerry Garcia of the RPG world, I think. I could only imagine if it was Matt Mercer. They would have been there like the week before.
Jesus, Mercer. Another one out there on YouTube teaching people how to do it wrong.
Oh yeah, what's he doing wrong? Let's hear this one.
Oh my God! You know what? There is, between him and Perkins, I watch their games, and I mean they're okay people, and they're fine GMs. But there is so much, they have such a tone problem. They're, at times they get so wacky, and like, I can't take that crap. My game is serious business, damn it.
So define wacky. What's wacky? Like, call something out specific.
It's been a while since I watched.
Even if you have to make something up for an example.
I don't know. You know what? Okay. This is Perkins' thing though. This wasn't Mercer's, because I was watching. He was running these people through Curse of Strahd, and supposedly they're famous people, but I have no idea who they are because they're not me, and I don't care. But the one girl was playing a paladin, and she decided that her paladin was stupid. Like she's playing this like bubble-headed, airhead, stupid paladin with a southern drawl. And like in these otherwise very serious encounters, she's like flouncing around saying stupid, misunderstood thing, like misunderstanding the situation, making anachronistic jokes, and like completely disrupting the tone of what should otherwise be a serious scene. I had to finally leave the room. My girlfriend was watching it, and I had to leave the room. It's like, why are they letting her do this? She's ruining the tone of the game for everybody else. And it's that kind of crap. Everybody thinks, oh, well, you know what? A joke is good anywhere. It's no, a joke is not good anywhere. There's a time to shut up, stop laughing, and weep a little bit because your characters just got 3 children killed, and now you have to go tell the parents that their kids are dead and bring them the bodies. That's a situation that has come up in my games repeatedly.
That's harsh.
I did go through a period where I was running 3 different groups at the same time, 3 different games. And just by a weird quirk of coincidence, in all 3 games in the same month, children were killed or people were killed, and the players all found themselves in situations where they had to go to the loved ones and basically deliver the news. One of them involved children that had been torn apart by gnolls as a direct result of the players screwing up. And another one was this girl's girlfriend was killed, and Oh, they didn't know they were lovers, so that was just a surprise for when they were delivering the news. They thought they were just friends. Yeah, it's just one of those weird things that it just came up in 3 games at once.
I was just distracted by the chat. But I actually made my first player cry. I was like, oh no, what do I do? No, so I was running a scenario where they needed to acquire material components from these hags. And so said player was actually like, oh, this is going to be one of those deals like Fairy Tale where, we're not just going to be able to go and barter for stuff to get stuff. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what it is now. So they had to give up something personal, and it was going to be a memory. The hags were going to take a memory from each of them in order for them to get what they wanted. So they kind of did this ritual, and the player had started the game with the riding mastiff. It was a halfling, and so what I did is I had each player describe the memory, and it was only like afterwards that I told them that they were going to lose that memory, that they didn't have it anymore. So after the ritual was completed, I described her looking at her dog and not knowing who it was, and feeling connected to it but not knowing why. And like kind of went through like a little bit more of a drawn out thing, and she got a little emotional. I was like, oh my god, I just made someone cry in a game. But so I guess that's what you're talking about, more like serious, less dick jokes.
Well, you know what though? No, honestly, what it comes down to is its tone, right? I mean, you have a horror movie and it has a certain tone to it. It is about dread. It is about disempowerment. It is about isolation. That doesn't mean that there's never a light moment where the characters can relax a little bit, or that they even share a laugh occasionally. But for the most part, you wouldn't want to have a horror movie where suddenly one of the characters shows up in a jester costume and is slapping everybody with rubber chickens every other scene. It would screw with the tone. And I just tend to run a more serious tone. I run Lord of the Rings, and not like, I can't think of a good fantasy parody. Oh, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I'm running Lord of the Rings, not Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And if Sir Lancelot or Sir Robin showed up in Lord of the Rings from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, everybody sitting in that movie theater would go, what the hell just happened? This is totally emotionally jarring. So, and as a GM, it is your job to control the tone at the table, to figure out the tone everybody wants to play. I'm not just saying, pick your tone and do it, but figure out the tone that everybody is into. And if it reaches a point where somebody's character is utterly disruptive of that, you pull them aside and say, listen, your little stand-up comedy act here does not jive with this tale of a tortured vampire who is desperately seeking a replacement for his lost love. Sorry, just doesn't work. Come back with an actual emotional character.
And people are saying in the chat, session 0 and social contracts and all of that stuff. Prior to the game,
the standard bullshit terms that people throw out when you say this stuff, like they mean anything.
I think it helps, or at least if people are going to go off the rails and try and do their own thing, you have something to point back to and say, well, this is what we all agreed to.
Yeah, but you know what? Like people throw out the word social contract. Like, oh, you have to, the social contract, like that's advice. That is not advice. Okay? There is nothing actionable about saying, oh, the social contract, don't forget the social contract, because no shit. Every time people get together with a common goal, there's an implied social contract. Okay? That's not a thing in gaming. That's just a human thing that we all understand. That doesn't help anybody. What helps people is when you do have that character who's going off the rails and fucking up your tone, that you can say to the GM, okay, this is what you have to do. You have to pull the player aside And you have to say to them exactly this and exactly why. And you yourself have to understand why this is a problem. Just yelling the word social contract at people are saying, did you know there's a social contract in gaming? Is useless advice. And yet I see article after article that just talk about the social contract in gaming for 2,000 words. By the way, there's a social contract. No shit. Give me something practical and actionable.
I'm just laughing because your fans are showing up.
the Stockholm Syndrome victims.
So you had said you're about to start a new campaign. Are you playing? Starting? Are you going to be a player or running it?
Oh, I am far too clever, creative, witty, and handsome to be a player. So I don't play. I haven't played in a long time. Okay, like once or twice a year, I will play in a short game, but I have no interest in playing. I'm too good at the game to be a player.
Interesting.
And honestly, even more, I'm too good at being a GM to waste myself on the other side of the screen. The world needs great GMs, so I would be doing a disservice to everyone if I didn't run the game. What I'm actually running is an online D&D 5th edition campaign for 30 people.
30 people at the same time?
No, not at the same time. Just it's the same campaign. I've set up for my high-level Patreon supporters. I promised them a while ago that I would figure out a way to run games for them online. And I've come up with a formula that will allow me to allow all of them to participate in an ongoing campaign, even though the individual players might only play in one session a month. There's a guild setup that allows them to communicate between games and pay attention to the larger ongoing story.
Okay, so how are you finagling that? How are you how many? So 30 players once a month. You run in 6 groups, 5 groups.
Yeah, I mean, it's 5 to 6 sections a month, which is certainly manageable at 4 hours a piece. And basically the players are members of an organization, a guild or what have you. Rebel Alliance, doesn't matter what excuse you use, because the premise is just an excuse for the gameplay structure. So, and there are missions that publish that the players can volunteer for. They show up on that day, they play through the mission. The successes, failures, and discoveries they make affect the ongoing story, and they can communicate with the other players about what happened in their mission, so that if the players pay attention to all the ongoing debriefings and everything else, they can tease out what else is going on and recognize the villains and then take actions and make decisions in later missions to bring the story to some sort of a conclusion. I'm being a little bit vague because it's still somewhat experimental. This is something to see if it will actually work. So I've let in 15 of the 30 players for the first season, which will be about 2 months long.
Are you recording these games, or are these going to be private?
These are private. It's just for me and my patrons. I don't do live, actual plays and stuff. It's like my games are there for me to enjoy it with my players. Once you start broadcasting the stuff, you become cognizant of the audience, and you're trying to give them the most entertaining time possible. And I find that doesn't always jive with running the best game possible for the players.
So I can see that, but we run games, but we really don't worry about that. We just run the games we're going to run, to be honest with you. And we may cut down on certain things just because it's annoying for the game, but it still focuses on the game. We actually do a similar thing with the guild you're talking about. We have the company, the NAG, and it's just a mercenary band that it's an excuse to have the players come together every month, and they're different players, and we don't have to figure out how they got there. They're all part of the same group, and that's where they get their quest missions from, whatever is going on.
Yeah, and that was exactly where I started with, but I also want the thrill of sort of an ongoing campaign where there is a meta plot, a greater plot that the missions tie into that the players can then affect. So that's where it sort of requires me to allow communication through an online group between the different players that can inform their decisions and, let them solve these mysteries.
So what kind of theme do you got going on? Is there anything you tell me about that without like spoiling it if your players are watching or whatever?
Sure. So currently it takes place in a city that for whatever reason appears to have a mind of its own. The city was recently discovered. It's the ruins of an ancient city, and this lord became obsessed with resettling it and rebuilding it. And the city has its own influences. It has its own agenda, apparently, and there are certain magical things that it can do. And because it seems to be a source of great magical power and also ancient mysteries, because it's one of these ancient cities were built on top of themselves, ruins on top of ruins on top of ruins. So various groups and factions are all trying to seize control of whatever is the source of the magical power in this city. The players are basically in sort of a goodish aligned adventurer guild type setup where they just take on general jobs for the population. But of course, the different factions are tugging them in different directions.
Cool. Sounds like an interesting backdrop for some adventures to go on.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. So just the sentient city. We run 3 live games, and then we have 2 long going 5th edition games, which have been a lot of fun. They've been going on for like 2 years now. But it's the same thing. We only play like once a month for each campaign. So it's really, I know you're a professional DM and you like DMing, but we actually like playing as well. So it took me many years to actually cultivate my other Nerdarchy Ted to start running regular games. But so we do 3 games, and 2 of them are D&D games, and we have a 3rd game which is always short sessions. Our friend Scott will come in and run for us, and he's got this weird thing. It's like 3, 5, 7 sessions, and that's like the arc, and then it's done. Move on to the next thing. He also believes a game should be able to run in the length of a movie, which he has not successfully done yet, but that is one of his objectives. So we'll use that 3rd game to actually play things other than Dungeons and Dragons. Gasp. But so we try and use the channel, like, while D&D is like our main thing, we like to throw out some other things, introduce the fans to other games, other genres, other systems, let them know there's things other than D&D out there. Because I'm sure you get this question all the time too. Anyone that creates a lot of content, they always want to, like, how do I play Star Wars with Dungeons and Dragons? How do I play this with Dungeons and Dragons? And like my answer is always like kind of the same. Like, you don't. Dungeons and Dragons can only do one thing good, and that's Dungeons and Dragons. So
fair enough. Yeah, I will say Dungeons and Dragons can do several things good. They are all different iterations of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, like, there's so many great systems out there. I was like, well, why don't you just use that system? Like Star Wars, there's like a half a dozen Star Wars systems designed to play that game you want to play.
Yeah, and some of them are actually good.
Yeah. Have you checked out the latest iteration of Star Wars?
What, the Fantasy Flight Games one?
Yes.
The Fistfuls of Dice Revolution?
Yes, that one.
Yeah, it's okay. I don't hate it.
Really? I'm surprised. I'm a little disappointed.
Sorry.
Because, that's one people seem to love to hate because of the proprietary dice. I know I've got a satchel of them around here somewhere. Yeah, we did a campaign of that. That was fun. I enjoyed it. It's definitely, if you like a crunch heavy game, that would be your jam. So do you have a favorite edition of D&D?
Jesus, no. You know what? It's hard for me to say because, okay, I have least favorite editions of D&D, but like the current editions of D&D like I'm like looking at my shelf like that's going to tell me the answer. Obviously, I spent the most time in third edition. And you know, I have a soft spot in my heart for third edition. I also have nostalgia goggles for second edition because I grew up on second edition. But objectively speaking, it's a terrible system. You know, it's before we invented design elegance. So, you know, and third edition, see, okay, so here's the thing. Fifth edition is the edition that I want to say is my favorite. But I have, as much as I like fifth edition. It's a fun game. It's easy to play and all that stuff. I have very little respect for it because both third edition and fourth edition were in their ways revolutionary in the whole, you know, in the lifespan of D&D. Third edition revolutionized a lot, and fourth edition revolutionized a lot. I like third edition. Fourth edition, while it did a lot of really, really, really neat and cool things, added together, it didn't work as a whole. Fifth edition is a disappointing cop-out. It's sort of just rolled back everything. It's trying to just recapture the nostalgia. It was basically innovation through subtraction. It was just like, how much can we take out and still make it D&D? Let's just boil it down to its essence. And that's neat, and it makes for a very simple, very playable game, but it's also hard to respect that as a piece of design. And on top of that, the actual product of 5th edition, the rule books themselves, are really poorly organized and terribly done. They are very low-quality publications.
So yeah, I totally get. All they did really with 5th edition was take the nostalgia and kind of the better and more interesting parts of all of the editions and put them in one book. Which, while it makes for a great game to play and fun, you're right. There was no risk taking. They didn't push any envelopes. Even with 4th edition, I know it was very divisive and people hated. There's a lot of people that hated it, and there's a lot of people that loved it. But at the same time, like, they definitely took some risks and made some jumps there that I feel like people should, at the very least, respect them for that. Well, even if they weren't happy with the end product.
Well, the sad reality is everyone, especially gamers, will say how much they love innovation. But the truth of the matter is everybody just keeps buying the things that are familiar. And that's just human nature. We want innovation because we want to experience new things, but at the end, we always end up going back to what's comfortable.
Someone in the chat, 5e is amazing for new players. It is actually a really good system for new players. It's easy to pick up. It's easy to learn. It's easy to play. It's got some of the cool components from 3rd edition and 4th edition, and all the nostalgia from AD&D.
Though in terms of the actual performance, 4E was kicked 5th edition's ass in terms of for new players. And in fact, it was very new player focused.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely much easier to use. Mm-hmm. Everything worked the same. With even in 5th edition, there's different rule sets depending on what kind of character you're playing. Where 4th edition, they kind of boiled it down to basically one rule set for everybody.
Right. Yeah, everything was spelled out. Everything was straightforward. There was only one dice mechanic. Whereas 5th edition went back to the 2.5 dice mechanics that 3rd edition had, which is, I still don't understand that choice. I still don't understand why saving throws are still a thing.
What do you prefer defenses instead?
Yeah, actually, that made a lot of sense. 3rd edition came along and said, okay, you know what? We have too many different dice mechanics in this game because you're rolling different dice for every, In second edition, by the time they added like all the non-weapon proficiencies and the other stuff, so you would roll a d20 for attack rolls. If you were attempting to use a proficiency, you would roll 3d6, and you were trying to roll under the ability score. If you're trying to find a secret door, you would roll 1d6, and if it was a 1 or a 2, you found the secret door. And for initiative, you would roll, I think it was a d10 in second edition, if I remember correctly, blah, blah, blah. So there were all these different dice mechanics going on. And third edition said, what if, let's get rid of all that crap, invent one dice mechanic, the d20 roll, d20 plus ability score plus other modifiers, compare it to a result. You're always trying to roll high, and you're always trying to roll the same thing. Fine and dandy. And what that really did was it put, there was a logic that came into the dice at that point. It was like, if you are attempting an action, whatever that action is, if you're attempting to bring about change in the world, you are touching the die. You are rolling the die to exert your will on the world. And then, for whatever reason, somebody had a brain aneurysm and said, what if sometimes you had to roll a die to not let someone else do things? Like if a wizard's casting a spell, sometimes the wizard rolls an attack roll, but sometimes you roll and I fucked up your spell roll. And that became the saving throw. And the saving throw is a really odd little creation in third edition. And I understand that it's historic because D&D always had saving throws, but they went so far with making one universal dice mechanic, and then they backed it off at the last second for saving throws. And fourth edition said, you know what, let's just finish the job. You have the fortitude, reflex, and will defense. And when if you are taking an action, you roll the dice. And if you're taking an action against a creature, you're going to compare it to one of their defenses. And it's basically just a reverse saving throw. And then for whatever reason, 5th edition said, nah, we got to have the saving throws back again, so that sometimes you roll to do things and sometimes you roll to screw someone else up from doing them. Yeah, it's a pet peeve of mine because it just comes down to a little bit of design elegance. There's no reason that wizards can't just roll the die for all their spells. What? And for that matter, like every time the fighter does something, they get to roll the die to make it happen. Sometimes when the wizard does something, the enemies get to roll the dice, and the wizard just gets to sit there and watch the dice being rolled. Why is that? Wouldn't the wizard want to roll the die? I'm casting a sleep spell. I want to roll the dice. So it's just such a weird little quirk of mine.
It is. Mutants and Masterminds, which is based off of third edition. They did do that. They went to all defenses with their system. Although their hit point system is really weird, but
yeah, well, it was based on durability saving throws, and the better you did on the saving throw, the more the consequences of being attacked were, or the worse.
It's a game I enjoy playing, but I found that people that came from D&D and wanted to do hit point damages really struggle with that system.
Well, part of that too is that hit point damage just would not work in a superhero game.
No, it doesn't make sense.
Superheroes are highly resilient, and they bounce back from damage, from scene to scene. Batman gets clobbered repeatedly by Bane in one scene, and in the next scene, Batman has recovered and he is able to do it again. And it doesn't really make sense to start ticking down an attrition clock on a superhero because they don't work that way.
Well, yeah, and just the same way, I don't know if you play Theater of the Mind or if you do minis, but minis do not work well in a superhero game at all either. when your hero can literally run around the world and around, makes it a little pointless.
Yeah. I mean, and especially because Theater of the Mind, even though I hate that term, I'll just use it. Theater of the Mind is certainly much more cinematic. It's much more set piece focused than grid based. Well, and you know what? This is the thing too. Like, the part of the reason why I hate saying Theater of the Mind versus grid based is you can do Theater of the Mind in D&D, but you're not really. Because the grid is still there, you're just imagining it in your head. Because the entire game of D&D is measured out in 5-foot squares. Every range, what you can interact with, it's all defined by precise precision. precise positions. So even if you say, yeah, I'm running D&D as theater of the mind, no, you're really not. You're just imagining the grid in your head. It's still a gridded game.
Well,
and it is designed from that perspective.
That's one of the hoodwinks of going from 4th to 5th, right? Like, if you really dissect a lot of the 5th edition stuff, there's a lot of 4th edition in there. They just change the words to confuse all the angry people. No pun intended. But yeah, like they moved everything to 5 foot instead of calling it out like they did in 4th edition. They just give a range, but the ranges are still 5 foot increments.
Well, let us all also keep in mind that that was not new to 4th edition either. 3rd edition was also measured out in 5 foot squares.
Yeah, it was started there.
Well, I mean, 4th edition, you open up your 3.5 player's handbook, and at the back of the book, you find templates for all the spells. There's actually a whole discussion in the spellcasting chapter on this is the shape of spell templates. And you would not need that if your world was not marked out in 5 foot squares.
Well, yeah, it started in 3rd, but then 4th, instead of saying the distance, it would say 2 squares, 3 squares. And I think a lot of players found that jarring, even though they were already doing it. I don't understand why.
Yeah, the square was just an abstraction of 5 foot. But
they basically just made the grid. They just put the wording right in there instead of saying the extra numbers. It's like, well, no, you're really just pushing them back 3 squares because that's honestly, what we're doing.
It didn't even start in 3rd edition. If you go back to the earliest of editions, everything was measured in inches because those were inches of table measurement. 2nd edition moved away from the inch measurements, and even some of 1st edition moved away from the inch measurements. But 2nd edition, when it went into the player's option era, because they were testing stuff for 3rd edition, they added the combat and tactics rulebook, which was basically a more rigorously grid-based approach than a table measurement approach. So that was really the shift between it. But there's always been rigorous measurement in D&D. People just don't like to admit it.
Yeah, it's true. And the truth of the matter is, even before we went to minis, we would play with Kit Kats and dice. 6-sided dice were the enemies, and 4-sided dice were your heroes. And we drew our own grids.
Can I go off on something? Because you bring up a really good point, and this drove me crazy in 4th edition. Okay. When I was a kid and still playing 2nd edition and basic D&D, back in the basement in 1988 and 1989, eventually I got my hands on one of those vinyl battle mats, which was really cool because you could draw the map on it with the wet erase markers. And from there we started using little paper cutouts. I would cut out little paper squares, and you would label them with the different things, and you would move them around on the map, yada, 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 yada. I used that for 2/3 of my combat through 2nd edition, even before the combat and tactics stuff, through 3rd edition. And then 4th edition came around, and I actually started collecting miniatures with 4th edition because I started to like miniatures, and I had money, so so I built up an extensive miniature collection. But everybody started flipping out in 4th edition, like, oh my god, this game requires miniatures. You have to spend so much money on miniatures. It's the only way you can play because you can't play without a grid. And I'm like, wait a minute. Just because the game needs a grid and tokens does not mean you need miniatures. For years, you do Skittles, do M&Ms. People have done that for years. It's like suddenly people forgot that there was anything else you could use other than buying the plastic miniatures on printed maps. It's like, guys, we've been doing this. You know what? Even before that, sometimes in really early editions, you would take out a piece of paper and the GM would sketch the room out and say, okay, this is what the room looks like because it's a complicated layout. It's not a square. And here's the stuff, and here's where you guys are, and here's where the goblins are. What do you want to do? And they would update that little map. It's not like suddenly it had to be plastic miniatures. People just flipped out. People lost their goddamn minds.
Dude, you totally ninja'd me because I was gonna circle back to that because that's definitely what we used to do when I was a teenager, tween. The DM, for the complicated battles, would break out the paper. We would do X's and O's like football, like a football team, and figure it out that way.
Right. But we gamers have been finding those solutions since time immemorial.
Yeah, because you'll have a dick DM that'll attack the mage in the back with his ogre, And you're like, well, how did he get past all the rest of us?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, absolutely. Anyway, I got to cut this short because I do have an appointment that I'm probably running late for. But yeah, we usually run about an hour, and we're about an hour and 20 minutes or so. And we've
I was
had
going to comment on you saying you're cutting it short because I thought we went over time.
Yeah, we did. We've had a solid 130, 140 people all along. They love to come and hate the angry.
Yeah, I get that a lot, but they all know I'm right. They hate me because I say the things that everybody's thinking.
Yeah, well, I do appreciate you coming on. Open invitation. You can come back. You can come back and rile up the fans anytime you like.
No, I would love to come back. It's been a lot of fun. It was great getting to chat with you. I love your site. I don't really watch your streams as much as I should, but the site itself is really, it is the second best RPG gaming website out there, I think.
Oh wow, that's high praise. Thank you. Especially because I'm the chimpanzee pushing the buttons, and I don't know what I'm doing at all. I just push buttons until it does what I want it to. Sort of constantly breaking things and having to fix this. I really appreciate the compliment. And thanks for hanging out. Everybody in the chat, thanks for hanging out with us. We appreciate it. Everybody have a great day. Until next time, stay nerdy.